Hey everyone, welcome to your lesson on groundwater. So, we think when we walk, we're on solid ground. It's not true. We are walking on lots and lots of tiny pore spaces that exist between the grains of soils and sediment particles that are in the earth. And in addition to pore spaces, there are also little narrow joints and fractures. So those are like little tubeways of air. When it rains, some of the water runs off of the land, some evaporates, and the rest soaks into the ground to become what's called subsurface water. And there's two different zones. There's a zone of saturation and a zone of aeration. A zone of saturation is where the water fills all the open spaces, so all the pore spaces and the joints and the fractures gets filled up with water. Most of the water in the soil seeps down until it reaches that zone. Groundwater is the water that's in this zone. And this is where a lot of people get their drinking water from the zone of saturation. The water table is the upper limit of this zone. Okay, so here's a graphic for you. The zone of saturation is where the water sinks down due to gravity, and once it can't sink down anymore, it stops sinking down, and the top level of the zone of saturation that distinguishes the zone of saturation from the zone of aeration is called the water table. That's the top of the zone of saturation, is another word for water table. Here's a different graphic showing you groundwater, that's the top of the water table, and the zone of saturation, and then the zone of aeration. So infiltration is when the water seeps down through the soil and the pore spaces. We're going to get to aquifers, aquicludes, and perched water tables in just a little bit, but just take note that they are on your diagram. So the aquifer is that water, groundwater. The aquiclude you see is with the perched water table. Okay, the zone of aeration is the area above the water table where the soil, sediment, and the rock are not saturated. They're filled mostly with air instead of water. If you are getting your water from wells cannot pump water from this zone because there's not enough water available. Okay, again, same graphic. The zone of aeration does not have water, so if we were trying to put a well in, if we wanted to develop this area, we would have to drill deep enough to get into the zone of saturation. So the storage of groundwater. The flow and storage of groundwater vary depending on what kind of subsurface material there is. The amount of groundwater that can be stored in the ground depends on the porosity. Porosity is the percentage of the total volume of rock or sediment that has pore spaces. The spaces between the sediment particles, again, are the pore spaces. And y'all are going to be doing a lab where you are calculating porosity of different kinds of subsurface materials. So rocks or sediments can be very porous, but still block water's movement. So it doesn't just depend on pore space size, which is porosity. It also depends on something called permeability. So zone A on the diagram on the right is the zone of saturation and is an aquifer. Zone B would be the zone of aeration. And figure 1, you have the pores are all the spaces between the grains. So it's pretty high porosity. High porosity means there's space between the sediments. There's air, a lot more air for the water to move through. Low porosity means the sediments are tightly packed together and there's not a lot of extra space to store water. So groundwater flows slower when the pore spaces are smaller. So when there's low porosity, the groundwater flows slower because there's not a lot of space. Permeability is the ability to transmit water through those connected pore spaces. So if something is permeable, it means it flows through it easily, which if we're talking about subsurface materials, sand is a permeable material. Water flows through sand really easily. An impermeable material means water does not flow through it easily. That would be something like clay, where it puddles on top of it. Other things that are permeable and impermeable. A t-shirt is permeable. T-shirts, if you're outside when it rains, your t-shirt's going to get soaked. If you have on a raincoat, that is impermeable. Water does not flow through it. Umbrellas are not permeable, whereas a sweatshirt or a hoodie is permeable. So again, we've got porosity and permeability. And this just shows the blue arrows are the spaces between the particles for water and air to flow. So there's three main types of subsurface materials, and those are sand, silt, and clay. Sand out of the three are the largest particle size, very high permeability, so water moves really easily through sand. Silt is medium-sized particles and medium permeability, and then clay is the smallest size particles and low permeability. So particle size is going to determine porosity. So because clay has the smallest particles, it also has the lowest porosity, and it has low permeability. We go back to this slide, layers that get in the way or prevent water movement. What kind of sediment do you think that would be? Think about sand, silt, or clay. Which type does not let water move through easily? And that would be clay. This is just another diagram. You see the well, you see the V-shaped cone, the white line on the left. Your aquifer is getting filled up by a river, which is the source, what's called recharge. This is a diagram with a couple different particle sizes in layer F and layer D. You've also got a line shown by letter C. You've got letter B. You've got a well at F and a well at G. You've also got a little stream at letter A. It's kind of hidden in the mountains. Y'all are going to be doing a card layout later with this. Think about where might the zone of aeration be? Where might the zone of saturation be? I mentioned perched water table. Perched means a water table that is above the main water table in the area. It's perched up because of the sediments that are around it in the subsurface materials. Where might be the zone of aeration? Where might be the zone of saturation? Is the well at letter F able to get water? Is the well at letter G able to get water? Why or why not? You're going to explore these things through labs and through the card layout also. We're going to end with, do you think the water table is constant or that it changes? So the level of the water table, do you think that it's constant or that it changes? And if you think it changes, what do you think would cause this change? We will talk about this during our lesson check-in.